The Mesa de Anguila, Anguila means eel, is located in the southwest corner of Big Bend National Park. It is generally accessed from a trailhead at Lajitas, Texas. Most hikes are day hikes that go up through a steep notch at the trailhead end of the mesa. In this view, south is to the top. Water is usually non-existent except for the filtered water from the river to the west of the mesa. In addition to the 2 gallons in my pack, I had cached a total of 3 gallons between 2 separate locations on the east side. My original plan was to allow for getting to the river on day 4. My first several trips onto the mesa were up the standard approach on the notch at the northwest end of the mesa. Looking for more adventure, I researched other routes using Google Earth and over USGS maps. The last 3 trips I've used the route I show here, which includes a little used pack trail up the east side and a route out on the west side. This route is almost never used. I'll fly around the route to give an overview of the entire loop before going into the details for each day. From the trailhead up the canyon to night 1, continue up and over a saddle where I get to go downhill. Next, up to the mesa for night 2. Then on up to the highest point on my route, across the short flat section, and begin the long hike down to the river for nights 3 and 4. The route out, including night 5, follows a series of canyons along the west side of the mesa. I headed out on a sunny afternoon. The temp was in the 80s. I had chosen this 6-day period because there was a cooling trend. I hiked about half a mile to get to the entrance of the canyon off the east side of the mesa. From there the trail was at times up the dry creek bed, and at times the trail left the wash, taking shortcuts across big bends. Also, the trail would leave the wash where there were sections of dense growth or blockage from large boulders. The first time I did this route, the trail was not marked, and I kept to the wash the entire time. It was a bloody and very exhausting trip. Several years ago, they put in rock cairns to identify the route. Stopped as the sun was getting low and set up camp on a fairly smooth section of the wash. Looking back towards the setting sun, looking ahead towards the saddle I would be passing over the next day. Breaking camp, day 2. This canyon wall was next to my campsite. During the night I would hear rocks rolling down this wall. Picking up the trail, day 2. The hike to the saddle. Picked up a cached gallon of water in this section. The last 50 yards were very steep, even with switchbacks. A lot of slipping. Went down once. Looking back. Looking ahead. Next I hiked down the south side of the saddle, eventually connecting with another wash. This was a very pretty section of the trail. I'm disappointed I didn't get any pictures of it. I spent a long time hiking this wash before the trail broke off and started uphill. I knew this next section was long and steep, so I spent a little bit of time resting and listening to my favorite tunes before proceeding. This section was the largest elevation gain on the way to the top. A characteristic of hiking a mesa is that there are lots of ups and downs. One is rarely allowed to continually gain elevation. It can be frustrating to gain hundreds of feet and then find out you have to give a lot of it back. Fortunately, this next section was fairly level and provided some relief before heading up another steep hill. After getting up the hill, it was back to ups and downs on the way to cache number 2, where I had left 2 gallons of water. Whenever I cache water, it's always on my mind whether something might have happened to it. Always a relief to find it's just like I left it. These 2 gallons had cost me a 9-hour day hike from hell the week before. Actually, I left the bottles there and came back for them with just my day pack after setting up camp. After checking on the water, it was back to more ups and downs. Night 2 is at Tanaha Luhan. The burning question had been for weeks, would there be water in the Tanaha? The extra caches of water were my insurance. My campsite within yards of the Tanaha had a southern view of the mesa's highest point. The Tanaha was bone dry. Hooray for caching. A second, smaller Tanaha about 20 yards from the larger one. These next shots are pictures from the immediate area. Day 3 begins with a fairly mellow hike to the base of my final rise to the highest point on my route. That was the plan, anyhow. What I'm showing is the plan. I managed to pick out the wrong spot in the distance and ended up in the hills to the left before pulling out my GPS and realizing I was a half-mile away from the trail. Getting back to the trail was a pretty wild ride and added about an hour and a half to the Day 3 route. At this point, I'm feeling very appreciative of my GPS and declared it my new best friend for the day. On the other end of the scale, this shot is of a cat claw plant. Once it grabs you, it can be very difficult to get away without drawing blood or ripping clothing. Now up to the highest point. I'm feeling so relieved at having an actual trail in front of me. The steep incline didn't seem so bad. Looking southwest to the mountains in Mexico, looking back to where I started this morning, and looking to the northwest where I'm headed next. After a short, flat section, I begin the long descent to the river. A large boulder provides just enough shade to get most of me out of the sun for a little R&R and refreshments, hot water and dried fruit. Now, a winding route with many ups and downs takes me to a steep drop to the next level. From here, there is a sneak preview of views in store for the afternoon. Going down a narrow rocky section brings me to the major intersection on the main level of the mesa. This couple was doing a day hike, 6 miles in, straight up the middle of the mesa. These were the only other hikers I saw during the 6 days. I'm feeling pretty upbeat at this point, knowing it's all downhill from here. This section of trail is quite scenic. It helps to keep me distracted from the full sun and no shade. At the next point, I can begin to see where I'm camping for the next 2 nights. Towards the top of the picture and slightly right of center is a spire with sloping sides. My camp will be located on the river at the bottom of this slope. Down, 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 getting warmer as I get lower. Now more of the lowlands coming into view. If I hadn't done this route before, I think I was getting close. Another long exposed section, and although I'm feeling the strain of the heat in the miles, I'm encouraged as I anticipate an upcoming shady area. Still going. Finally, Relaxing in the shade after all that has proceeded on day 3 is almost better than, well, what I mean is it was quite satisfying. I used the sun to my advantage while resting. After a good rest and cooling down, I'm up for the last push to the river. For me, this site is truly an oasis, quite worn even in the shade, but the river is only 50 yards away. Never mind that the wayward Mexican cows also enjoy this site. They didn't need to, on my account, but they stayed away while I was there. One of my first orders of business was to spend time in the river. Breakfast day 4. I'm looking forward to having the day off. Mexican shore. Horses frequent this area. Looking downstream, my camp is in the trees off to the left. This is on the bank of the river with the spire in the background. Filtering water. Looking upstream from camp. Cooking dinner in these temperatures seems like a bad idea. The second night at this site, I ditched the tent, but the insects turned out to be quite a nuisance. Morning, day 5, looking upstream where my route will begin along the riverbed. The vegetation eventually gets too thick to continue along the river, so I break off and head uphill and along the foot of the slope before dropping down into a wash. It takes me away from the river and up a wash to a deep canyon. Here's a video of the section taking me up out of the canyon. I'm getting ready to go up a monster hill here, looking back to where I just came from, and tough to get all of this stuff into the picture. This is the actual hill that I'll be going up, even beyond where you can see up there. And there's some other really interesting canyon walls here. So here I go. Switchbacks help ease the effort of the first and steepest part. The route flattens out a bit and continues on up to a saddle. At the saddle, it's break time as I look back down the canyon towards the spire at nights 3 and 4. This is a view of what's up next. After a failed start off to the left, I ended up taking a new route down the right side to the valley bottom. Looking back to the last saddle, the arrow points to what had been the route on my previous 2 trips. The trail had deteriorated to the point that I didn't have the courage to keep going. It was a slow, grueling backtrack to where I found the ultimate route. I was very thankful to have made it back out of this section. It really scared me. The next section was fairly routine. Partially up a wash and partially on animal trails, I arrive at the next saddle. I've never seen anyone else in this section between the spire and the park boundary. Looking back at the last saddle, at top left, the next section is steep and rocky, dropping towards another canyon. The final descent into the bottom of the canyon, while beautiful, continued to be rocky, with the added complication of dense vegetation. At one point, I had to drop my pack and spend a half hour breaking and bending back spiny branches. I intercepted a wash that took me to the riverbank. No shade. I dropped the gear, switched to my sandals, made my way to the deepest part of the rapids, and laid on my back for quite a while. After cooling down, I filled my water bag and went a short ways back up the wash, where I found some shade and filtered a bunch of water. After a nice long rest and a lot of rehydrating, I packed up and moved a short distance up the wash and into Night 5 camp at the base of the next day's route. Dinner was beef jerky, washed down with lots of water. Then I read more of the mystery I'd been working on and enjoyed the glow of the sun on the canyon walls. This is the start of day 6, looking back. And now, looking ahead to the next saddle. This portion of the route was a combination of animal paths and using the wash as I made my way to the final route out. Looking back, looking forward from here, I could see hints of civilization. Somewhere in this final section, I made a poor choice in paths and ended up adding several hours of very tough terrain, getting to a point where I could clearly see where I needed to go. The town of Lajitas, Texas is, more than anything else, the location of a luxury resort and golf course. Quite a contrast coming out of the desolation to this site. I picked my way over the remaining distance to a ruins at the edge of the park property. Next, a short jog off park property to a golf course road where I came across some resort help working on the irrigation system. After we talked for a bit, one of the men asked if I wanted some water. I said, "No thanks, I've got some." He said, "It's in the ice chest." I folded. With the cold water in hand, I finished up the last section back to my truck. All in all, this was a pretty tough trip with a lot of marvelous moments wedged in between times of exhaustion and concern. I'm feeling pretty proud and ready for a cold Red Bull.